Hey everyone, Will Brink here, brinkzone.com. So the other day I did a talk for the Harvard Alumni Club, the one local to me, and and brought my camera and got it all set up and uh, pressed the uh, pressed the button to record and thought I was all proud that I was going to have killed two birds with one stone. I'd do my talk, I'd have all this video, and of course the magic of technology. Battery died about 2 minutes in. So what I'm going to do is a video. I'm going to take the slides that I use for my talk. I'm going to explain them and hopefully get the same benefit. I think people enjoy this one. So what I covered was inflammation in health and disease with an emphasis on heart disease. I'll explain why that is in a minute. I think the interesting thing, at least, is that the role or the importance of inflammation in disease and various diseases, I think it is really old news to like anyone sort of in general health, let's say alternative medicine, some scientists and such. Honestly, it's really old news. It's something that, I think people have been aware of a long time. But it is now really starting to get the attention and the traction that it should, even among the, let's say, the mainstream, the more conservative medical scientific community. So that's a good thing. Better late than never. And let me bring in my slides here. I think, like I say, I think you'll all enjoy this. Here we go. Okay. So as you saw from the photo and stuff, that was me standing there and talking to people. And this was my main slide. Let me go to this guy. Let's get to it. Okay. So I'll try to go through this, as fast as I can, but it's a fairly in-depth discussion. So that was my first slide. Second slide, who is Will Brink, yada, yada, yada. Hopefully you guys know who I am. If not, you can read that too. I'll go to the website. So what I try to do with this talk is I wanted to start from zero, like assuming that nobody in the audience even knew what inflammation was. And because the people in the audience there and watching this, are wide ranging. Some of them were scientists. There was, a cardiologist there. There were also people that, had no medical, no science background at all. So I wanted to start from zero. Basically, what is inflammation? I took the very basic definition off of like WebMD or something. So most people here know what inflammation is. Second to that, break it down to two types. There are two primary types, which is acute versus chronic. And this talk is basically on chronic. It's on systemic chronic inflammation versus acute. I think most people, again, know there's a difference between a chronic and acute, but I gave some basic differences. And, the real debate, you see at the bottom there, there we go. The debate today, I think less so now, but still that exists between those that aren't still adopting inflammation as something that needs to be addressed, mitigated, and so forth, is that the cause and effect. What is the cause and effect, and which does vary by disease, and is it a target of therapeutic help? I mean, is something you can actually target and change? And the answer is yes, but there's not, let's call it a magic pill for that yet. I'm sure there's one in development now that it's being viewed as something, I think, that legit can be addressed and modified to reduce risk. I think we will start to probably see some drugs targeting that specifically. So next, I basically brought up some autoimmune inflammation-mediated diseases and conditions that at least people could connect to, that already know. Already, even in the most conservative circles, people know this is immune-mediated autoimmune inflammation type. So I just wanted people to sort of be able to grab something that they were familiar with before I went on to things that they may not be as familiar with or as accepting about. So next we go on to conditions and diseases that are less accepted as having an inflammation/immune mediated role. Sarcopenia, which is the age-related loss of muscle mass, which I did a full video. I wrote about an article about 20 years ago, very important topic. Various cancers, Alzheimer's diseases, and other brain diseases. There is a clear role of inflammation in Alzheimer's disease and some other brain diseases. Cause and effect, obviously, is where one could debate. And depression. Now, depression is a really interesting one. Again, there is no debate at all that depression is correlated with inflammation of the brain. Again, what is the role of inflammation, cause and effect, and so forth is where we could debate. But I still think the data is very suggestive of benefits of addressing the inflammatory aspect of depression and other schizophrenia and others. But I think that's a really interesting one. There's a doc I do follow. He's a psychiatrist who really talks about the dietary aspect of inflammation, depression, and some of the clinical benefits that he's seen personally in working with people's diets and stuff on depression and stuff. And heart disease. Now, you see, I underlined heart disease because from here on, I sort of focus on heart disease. And that's mostly because I think heart disease is really where inflammation is getting the most traction and attention. And so maybe it's the most convincing as far as what chronic systemic inflammation is telling us about heart disease and whether it's something that we can directly address. Is it a therapeutic target? I think the answer is yes. So I threw those up. Let's go to the next slide. Before I even moved forward, and maybe people watching this, maybe they have the same question, which is, okay, how do I test for it? Well, because some people may say, okay, you convinced me. I don't need to learn any more, Will. I'm happy. I want to know. Well, so here, I wanted to get this out of the way early. You can test for chronic systemic inflammation by C-reactive protein test, or much better, a high sensitivity HS-CRP. That's what you want. And that is a very accurate indicator of systemic inflammation. It's an old test. It's not new. It's been around, I think, 70 years. I think it's just the value of CRP testing is, I think, just really starting to get the attention it deserves, especially as it applies to heart disease risk. There are other more targeted tests for inflammation, such as IL-6 and TNF-alpha and such. But for general systemic inflammation, CRP or HS-CRP has shown itself to be very good. So if you want to know how to test it, that's how you test it. I think that test should be and probably will be added into the general testing that doctors do, along with, fasted glucose and things like that. If it's not already in some places, it really should be, and I think it will be because of how strong it is now as a primary risk factor for at least heart disease. And up comes a infographic. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize it, but this was a great infographic from the European Atherosclerosis Society consensus panel. So this is kind of like their, it's a great paper too if you want to go down the rabbit hole and really get into the details. But I liked their infographic because it's basically everything that they know in an infographic that leads to cardiovascular disease. Now, you will notice in red that they have put systemic inflammation as a primary independent risk factor. So that really says a lot to me, along with the usual suspects, hypertension, smoking, diabetes, but that they have put that at the top, recognized by this prestigious organization, to me tells me that I think we've really crossed the line, for it to be formally and officially recognized as something that you need to pay attention to, that medical professionals need to pay attention to. You will notice that also I have underlined a couple other inflammasome activation, pro-inflammatory. You just notice that the term inflammation, pro-inflammatory, continues to exist as part of the process for the development of atherosclerosis. Notice also that I have underlined oxidative stress. Now, I added my own little back and forth arrow. I think they missed an opportunity here, only to say that oxidative stress creates systemic inflammation. Systemic inflammation creates oxidative stress. They can become their own cycle, and if you address the oxidative stress, you can often break that cycle. Now, there are various insults that can cause oxidative. I mean, again, smoking, elevated blood sugar, outside chemicals. There's a lot of things that can cause oxidative stress, but I just think they missed an opportunity right there. And of course, so what you have is the risk factors on the top, and then of course you have elevated LDL. So what you're going to do, they all come together at the arterial endothelium, and you can read the rest of that. But also notice oxidized LDL. So I just thought that was really a great all-in-one infographic where they've really emphasized systemic inflammation as a primary risk factor. So that's all. I threw that up there. Let's work our way down. So I took this from the website, the Harvard Medical School Publishing, for a few reasons. One, obviously, I was talking to the Harvard alumni as an alumni. Two, of course, Harvard, whether you went to Harvard or you didn't go to Harvard, carries a certain amount of prestige and weight. And two, it's a very conservative university. It's a very conservative place. And that Harvard Medical is writing about C-reactive protein and the potential benefits of testing for it. I think, again, I feel like we've really crossed a line as to acceptance that this is something that is important. And in fact, it's even more important than people may realize. I think more important than certainly some medical professionals may appreciate. So let me work my way through the article. So the next slide from the same article, they did a nice job. You'll notice, they break it up nicely into little sections. This is not a scientific paper. This is more of a lay article for people to understand the importance of CRP as it relates to heart disease risk or cardiovascular risk in general. So a couple of they point out a couple of really important studies. Now, two of the studies they mention are from the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, if you're in science or you're in medicine or whatever, you know that is one of the most, if not the most prestigious medical journal in the world. It is certainly one of the most high-impact journals. I don't know if it's the most high-impact in the scientific community, but it's going to be in the top, 5. So this is not, some small, out-of-the-way, random journal. So two studies they focused on here, which was, so a series of studies published in the prestigious journals has shown, blah, 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 New England Journal, concluded that CRP outperforms LDL cholesterol as a predictor of cardiovascular risk. Now, probably any of you who follow this topic know that LDL, LDL-C, ApoB, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute, are considered the primary indicators of lab work or predictive labs that predict cardiovascular risk, and that CRP in this study was found to be more predictive is a big deal. I mean, we're talking millions of people. And more so, the next part down, the study March 23rd, 2000, concluded that C-reactive protein was a better predictor of cardiovascular events, heart attacks, strokes, bypass surgery, or angioplasty than other inflammatory markers. So you have two big studies in the journal that one found that CRP was more predictive of your risks than LDL, and that CRP was more predictive than other inflammatory markers, some of which I mentioned before, like IL-6 and TNF-alpha and stuff, which are not normally tested. They're not that easy to test. You can test them, but they're not. You can't just generally walk into LabCorp or Quest and get those done that easily. They have them, of course, but as far as general testing, CRP via HSCRP is the way to go. Continuing on with this article from Harvard Medical. This part was the take home, really, really important. So the 2000 study comparing C-reactive protein and LDL found that cardiovascular risk was actually greater for people in the high CRP, low LDL group than for those in the low CRP, high LDL group. Clearly, cholesterol testing would have missed people in the high CRP, low LDL group. So again, that is a huge finding in my view, that there's a good number of people that have heart attacks or strokes or what have you that don't have elevated LDL. And this may be the reason. That is, they have acceptable LDL numbers or CLDL levels, but they have higher CRP. And that CRP is more predictive than LDL, at least in these studies and some others, which I'm going to get to, means that if you were to test both of them, and you should, you would catch a whole lot more people, especially obviously those with elevated CRP and low LDL. I do want to say before we move on, importantly, what you don't want to take away from this type of information is, LDL doesn't matter. Okay, what only matters is inflammation. And there are people out there, especially on the internet, the good old internet, where you'll see them say that, LDL doesn't matter. Inflammation and oxidized cholesterol doesn't matter. And that's not true. It's absolutely not true. It's heart disease, cardiovascular disease writ large is a multifactorial disease. It does not have a single cause, which means that there's going to be multifactorial risk factors, and in my view, it should be addressed in a multifactorial way. It should be addressed from all of those routes. LDL, oxidative stress, CRP levels, which I told you are intertwined, and so forth. I don't see where there's a debate here, honestly. It's not either or. As far as I'm concerned, attack them all. I do know that some of the cardiologists that I talk with, that I follow, that I think are very good at what they do and trust their interpretations of the data and all that, have, again, given me some sort of pushback on this, however. They're not adoptive. They're not adopting, they're like, okay, sure, well, it's a risk factor, but, you really should focus on LDL. Let's go ApoB. We'll get to that in a second. And I think the issue with them, I understand, is that they are worried, and they see it. They kind of worried about people missing, the big picture of LDL and sort of ignoring it and chasing their tail for lowering CRP and inflammation. And I understand their concern there, but I don't think that's an excuse or a reason to sort of put your blinders on and ignore inflammation, CRP, when we have a handful of big studies repeatedly suggesting that CRP is more predictive than LDL-C. I just think that is, at this point, it's too big to ignore, and I understand their concerns, and I'm not saying they're even wrong about their concerns. I just think that it's not helping anybody to not incorporate CRP testing along with the others. I guess that's sort of my point. So those studies were 2000, 202, quote unquote, a long time ago. This is a brand new study, and I just wanted to sink home to the people who are there and people watching this. This is 2023. This is from the Lancet. And again, if you're in science, medicine, and so forth, again, the Lancet is, the 800-pound gorilla of journals. It is very high impact. It is highly respected journal. Again, I would say has to be, top 5 or so high-impact journals in the scientific medical community. And this was a really impressive study that, again, as far as I'm concerned, now, there may be people, there certainly are people, cardiologists, lipidologists and stuff that, really know the data, maybe go into the stats and the data deeper and want to, lessen my enthusiasm here, and by all means they should. But this study in the Lancet, let me go to the next page, was not one study. It was actually 3 studies looked at together. You have 30,000 plus people that looked at people that were already on statins. So I assume these were identified as high-risk people that were already on statins. And what they were looking at was, again, comparing CRP to LDL-C and residual risk or residual inflammatory risk. And what they found was, underlined, among patients receiving contemporary statins, inflammation by high-sensitivity CRP was a stronger predictor of risk of future cardiovascular events and death than cholesterol assessed by LDL-C. These data have implications for the selection of adjunct treatments beyond statin therapy and suggest that combined use of aggressive lipid-lowering and inflammation-inhibiting therapies might be needed to further reduce atherosclerotic risk. Again, I think this is a no-brainer. I think the data clearly supports this reality that we should be focusing on CRP testing, reducing inflammation, if we're trying to reduce cardiovascular disease and other diseases. Remember, this one is kind of heart disease heavy, but there are associations between a number of other diseases, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So how about you say, okay, I'm going to go get my HSCRP tested, Will, and what am I looking for numbers? These are the current recs. They may change as data progresses, but right now, basically below 1 milligram or below per liter is low risk of CVD. Between 1 and 3 is modest risk, and above 3 is high risk. So if you go ask your doctor, or some states you don't need your doctor to get blood tests. In Florida, I don't need a doctor to get blood tests. I can go to any major lab and get blood work done. But regardless, that's what you want to test. Now you know the numbers you're looking for. If you are above 1, you should look to address it. So, and now we will talk about how to do that. So, addressing elevated CRP. So you get your CRP and it's higher than you want it to be. You want to lower your risk of cardiovascular disease and osteoporosis and sarcopenia and diabetes and Alzheimer's and on and on and on it goes. So let's start. So lower body fat. I know this one seems sort of generic, like everybody just says lower body fat, but this is actually quite specific to inflammation because fat cells are actually the source. They actually produce most of the inflammatory cytokines and products that go out into your system. And so there is not just a generic lowering your body fat is good for you. There is a specific reason that fat cells themselves are the source of these inflammatory products that you are trying to lower. And so by simply lowering body fat, you will generally lower CRP. So keep that in mind. Exercise, okay, no brainer. That one is generically a benefit, but it does lower inflammation. Don't smoke. Yeah, we all know that. Mediterranean diet, I'm going to get into that in a little more depth in a minute. So we'll discuss that with a little more details so people can go along. Get younger. Now, I know you're, because when I gave this, I expected people in the audience to roll their eyes a little bit, and people watching this might roll their eyes a little bit, but there is a reason I discussed this. One, obviously, like most things as we get older, things are not as efficient in our body, and one of the things we become less efficient at is eliminating what they call senescent cells. Now, senescent cells, their nickname is zombie cells. Senescent cells are basically dead cells, cells that are not working efficiently anymore. They're dead or dying. Our younger metabolism, our younger body did a very good job of eliminating and getting rid of them. But as we get older, they are not removed as well. And so what we end up with is this burden of senescent cells that are adding an inflammatory burden to our system. And there are some drugs on the horizon. They're already being tested. They're called senolytics that remove these senescent cells, and will literally make your senescent cell burden younger. So this isn't just a joke to be a wise guy to tell people to get younger. It is something that is actually on the immediate horizon. There's already been clinical trials. They look very promising. There are other things you should look into. As far as lowering, again, exercise helps remove senescent cells and so forth. But there are some drugs in production or in trials that look very promising. Healthy hormones. This one does not get enough coverage. Does not get enough focus as it should. Again, medical doctors, scientists, can only look at so many things. My job is I'm more of a generalist. I'm always kind of trying to look at things from the mile high view. But this is one that needs to get more attention because, again, a lot of people do not have healthy hormones. I would more or less define a healthy hormone profile as that of a healthy 25-year-old, somewhere in that ballpark. We do know that dysregulation in hormones is associated with elevated inflammation and CRP. Again, you should always know what your hormones are doing. I think anybody over 40, because that's sort of the dividing line. Most people kind of take a nosedive in their hormones after 40. I think everybody after 40 should get a full hormone panel done yearly. And I think it's a mistake that, again, it's not the norm. It's not standard of care. And if you wait till you're having problems, you've probably already done years worth of damage. So here's my lecture. Address nutrient deficiencies, any decent multivitamin at least. And we'll get into some supplements in a second also that you can consider. But, you can have increased inflammation through a minor nutrient deficiency of a lot of things like zinc and E and copper and so forth. And a lot of these deficiencies are not uncommon. So very least, a good multi. Statins. Obviously a controversial topic. This is not the place or the time to really cover statins and any of the controversial reality. However, I just wanted to say that most people that know statins know that they do lower LDL, do improve lipid profiles, but they also lower CRP. And a lot of people don't know that. It's quite possible that one of the benefits of statins is, as far as their reducing cardiovascular risk and all-cause mortality and stuff, is they also reduce CRP. So FYI on that one. I'm not going to get too deep into statin discussion one way or the other. So let's get on to diet. So another, I pulled this also from the Harvard Publishing, Harvard Medical School, did a nice little write-up on Mediterranean diets. Let's go down to, sorry, I just jumped past where I wanted to be. So what is Mediterranean diet? I think most people know, but just the basic summary is an abundance of plant foods, including fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, legumes, minimally processed foods, seasonally fresh and grown locally. Olive oil is the principal source of fat for the Mediterranean diet, as well as, of course, what you would get from, fish, EPA and DHA. Cheese and yogurt consumed daily, but in low, moderate amounts. Fish and poultry, moderate amounts, a few times a week. Red meat consumed infrequently, but not zero. Just remember, it doesn't remove red meat from the equation. Fresh fruits for dessert, sweet, but I'm not a big fan of that part. I mean, I'm apparently, if people are eating that as their dessert and doing fine, not a big deal, but I wouldn't push it. And wine consumed in low to moderate amounts, usually with meals. So that is a basic Mediterranean diet outlook. I want to say two things about that before I move on. One is, I don't know if the Mediterranean diet is necessarily the best diet as far as it's reducing the risk of heart disease and cancer and other things, but it is the most studied. It's the diet that has the most data by far. If you take all the modern fad diets and you combine them, they don't have the data of support that the Mediterranean diet has. Now, it doesn't mean that somebody or someplace won't, take some version of the Mediterranean diet and tweak it and do some stuff and find something that's even better. That's possible. But for now, I think you're very safe with following the basic guidelines of the Mediterranean diet. Now, two, the Mediterranean diet is probably your best bet for longevity, disease prevention, they're associated with aging. However, probably not the best if you are somebody who's an athlete, trying to add muscle. It's a bit low on the protein side as far as I'm concerned. And so my basic advice to people is, for health and longevity, anti-aging, whatever, follow a basic Mediterranean diet. For the rest, if you're, bodybuilding, active athlete, whatever, basically follow a Mediterranean diet plus more protein. That's it. Find out how much protein you need via, like the ISSN position papers or whatever, and add that to your Mediterranean diet, and that's it. Worry about other stuff. There's a lot of things we can worry about. So here's a study. I really like this study because it brings together everything we've been talking about. It brings together Mediterranean diet. It brings together inflammation and cardiovascular disease. So it's bringing together everything I've been talking about up until this point. And let's see, what do we got here? Okay. So here is, and I might have got a little carried away with my virtual pen, but this was a really interesting study. So what this study did, which I think was brilliant, frankly, is it didn't just take people who are at high risk of heart disease and feed them Mediterranean diet and see what happened, which would have been, good enough. They actually broke this into 3 arms. And what they did was they gave one group a Mediterranean diet, but low fat, so minus the olive oil and the nuts. They gave another group the low fat Mediterranean diet plus olive oil, and they gave a third group Mediterranean diet plus the nuts. So they were really differentiating what is the impact of the fat portion. Is it, is the low-fat Mediterranean diet sufficient with its fiber and polyphenols and vitamins and antioxidants, or is there some added benefit of these fats? And lo and behold, the arm that got the olive oil and the nuts had much better responses than the low-fat version. So they had reductions in blood pressure, reductions in LDL, but with the nuts or the olive oil. But what was really impressive to me is inflammatory biomarkers related to plaque instability, such as C-reactive protein, CRP, interleukin-6, reduced 45 and 35%, and 95 and 90% in those getting the oil and the nuts. That is really impressive. That just blew me away. I mean, I'm a nerd. What can I say? But you can see, I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited about this. And of course, if you're eating a Mediterranean diet, you're not limited to just the olive oil and nuts. You get to eat both, which I would not be surprised was even cumulatively or synergistically beneficial when you do both. So that brings everything together, what I was talking about in terms of the Mediterranean diet is probably your best bet as far as disease prevention, heart disease, and reducing inflammation and CRP and so forth. So that study, I just thought, just brought it all together completely. So let's go into some supplements. So obviously, I'm assuming, of course, that you are doing all the right things. You're working out. Your diet's good. You're mostly in a Mediterranean type angle. But maybe your CRP is still not what you want it to be, or you want to hedge your bets. These are some of the supplements that I pulled out that have good data. There's more. There's a whole bunch of them, but I don't want to overwhelm people. I thought certainly if I give you a list, especially if you're not taking any of these. So let's start with fish oils, EPA and DHEA. Those are the active lipids in fish oils. Vitamin D3, there's very good data on vitamin D3 and inflammation. Curcumin, very good data on curcumin as far as being anti-inflammatory. N-acetylcysteine is the precursor to glutathione. That is having its impact more through that antioxidant pathway mechanism that we talked about, but glutathione is important for basically everything. Way too big a topic to cover, but big fan of NAC. Now, whey protein also increases glutathione and has good data that it reduces inflammation. Whey, it may actually be better than NAC for reducing inflammation, or at least increasing glutathione. I have a video that discusses why whey may be superior to NAC. Honestly, I take both, but both of those are... NAC is directly a precursor to glutathione. Whey has peptides in it that are and have a lot of other benefits. Cocoa, of course, that is the active ingredient in chocolate. Cocoa has some good data as an anti-inflammatory, nitric oxide synthase booster, and so on and so forth. It's one of the primary ingredients in my, if you can see, in my Alpha Joe product. Now, which goes into, I may say, basically my Alpha Joe product is a coffee booster, and so you will notice that below is coffee. And coffee, I just read a big paper that came out that found that more coffee, basically the basic result was the more coffee, the lower the CRP, up till about 4 cups. After that, it didn't have any additional benefits. But interestingly, basically that it was the more coffee they drank, up to about 4 cups, the lower the CRP. Not surprising. Just FYI, that was particularly strong for black coffee. It was weaker for coffee that had anything in it, which makes, because you got cream and sugar. If you start putting cream and sugar in your coffee, obviously you're going to start reducing the anti-inflammatory benefits, especially the sugar. But cocoa is very promising, and there is studies that suggest that cocoa and coffee combined has additional benefits, especially cognitively. So my Alpha Joe is cocoa, creatine, and L-tyrosine, which you then put in your coffee. I would expect a pretty potent anti-inflammatory CRP lowering outcome from that, but I don't know. Of course, we'd have to mix all of them together and test and see. But just FYI, if you're interested in at least 2 of those, putting them together. So I'm going to finish off with this guy. If you want to read and I didn't even cover it in this talk, but if you want to read a really good paper, an overall paper that really covers the entire big picture topic of chronic inflammation in diseases, all diseases, this paper over here to the right, Chronic Inflammation in the Etiology of Disease Across the Lifespan, is very good. It's very long and it's very dense, but it's a great paper. Highly recommend it if you're a science nerd. But I liked this infographic because I just thought they did a great job on the left here, right? So you have the major drivers of inflammation, chronic infections, some of which you have control of, some of which you don't. Physical inactivity, that's on you. Obesity on you. Diasposis. Diasposis is basically a sort of a catch-all term for microbiome, which is a big area of research these days, which is having a healthy microbiome in the gut, or not a healthy microbiome, but that's a big area of chronic inflammation. Diet, that's on us. Isolation and chronic stress, this is a really important one. A difficult topic. Of course, after COVID, I think there's a lot of people have suffered a lot, but there's some very interesting data. Chronic stress and depression is related to or associated with increased inflammation. Cause and effect? Don't know. Xenobiotics, of course, are external chemicals we may be exposed to. But I liked how they have a gear that these are the drivers. The driver then creates systemic chronic inflammation, which turns the cog, which plays a role in all these diseases. Metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, which I circled for the talk, cancer, depression, autoimmune diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, sarcopenia and osteoporosis, immunosenescence. These are all things we all want to avoid, I think, and we can. Again, how much control do you have? You see, we have a lot of control of things over on the left, and so I just thought this was a great infographic to sort of visually bring it home. And of course, I put the sad face. So that's my talk. I hope you got something from it. Leave comments below. Please like this video and follow this website if you liked what I had to say. I think that's all I have to say, and I'll see you guys on the Brink Zone.